What is up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another gruesome Get Ready With Me video. If this is your first time seeing my face, my name is Jessica, and in each of my videos I sit down here with you guys and I talk about a different true crime case whilst I put on some makeup. So if that sounds fun to you, I'd say subscribe, stick around, and join me back here each week. I am aware that the combination is not for everyone, so if you are one of those people, I do have some links especially for you down in the description, but for those of you who are sticking around, let's go ahead and get into today's case. Alright, so for today's video, well, for starters, we're going to be grabbing once again from the suggestion archive, so thank you to Jessica for requesting this one. Great name, by the way. But all jokes aside, I was shocked at the lack of coverage on this case from fellow true crime creators across basically every platform. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only people I've really seen cover this case up to this point are Danelle Hallan and Gavin Fish. Both have done incredible deep dives on this case, both have done numerous update videos, and Gavin actually did an interview with the sister of the victim in today's case. I'll definitely make sure to have both of them and their coverage of this case linked down below, but for the time being, why don't we here now get into the absolutely infuriating case of the murder of Kirby Carpenter. Ooh, and fair warning before we do get too far into things, while there is sort of a resolution to the case overall, the trials and the outcomes and sentencing and all that, that's still yet to come at the time that I'm recording this. So while I can't exactly present the case and its outcome in its entirety here to you today, do rest assured that there is at least a resolution in the offing, and hopefully it's a just one. And now with that said, how about I shut up and actually get into things. Okay, so we are actually back down in Mississippi today.
Mississippi.
And no, don't worry, I'm not gonna spell it again. Specifically, we're in northern Mississippi. Today's story takes place mostly in Tippah County, which is located right along the Mississippi-Tennessee border. It sits on 460 square miles of land. It hosts a population of just over 20,000 people, and it is most well known for being home to the oldest recorded, continuously running, still open flea market in the entire country. The First Monday Flea Market actually hosts more than 200,000 visitors annually, which is 10 times the actual population of Tippah itself, so that's a lot. And while I can't tell you with any certainty whether or not today's central figure ever spent any time at this specific swap meet, I can tell you that it does appear as though he lived within the same 50-ish mile radius of it for most of his entire life. Kirby McCord Carpenter was born on May 23rd, 1986 in Tupelo, Mississippi, to his mother Maddie and his father Jerry. According to his obituary, he was one of 6 siblings. He had 2 sisters and 3 brothers, so I have to imagine that there was always something going on in that house, like all the time. Shoot, I got half that amount of children and I feel like I most of the time can't keep up. So I can't even imagine doubling that. I'm sweating just thinking about it. Kirby graduated from Kossuth High School in 2005. I don't know exactly where he graduated within his class ranking per se, but I can tell you that it seems as though Kirby was always a relatively good student. Not only did he move on to be incredibly successful later in his life, lending to the idea that he was always probably a pretty hard worker, but I was also able to find some newspaper articles referencing some awards that Kirby won while he was in high school. Specifically, I believe it was a Behavioral and Social Sciences Award that he won at a state science and engineering fair in 2003. All this to say that pretty much his entire life, Kirby appears to have been a hard worker and a self-starter and a go-getter. Following his high school graduation, Kirby actually went on to enlist in the military, and this is something that he was incredibly proud of. He served in the United States Marine Corps, and if you yourself know any Marines personally, you know that they just have a whole different level of pride and nostalgia when it comes to their service in particular. In my experience, Marines are they're just built different. And that's coming from the wife of a Purple Heart Marine veteran. So take that for what you will. I wasn't able to find Kirby's exact position within the Marines, nor was I able to find where he served or for how long. But regardless of those specifics, I think just knowing that he made the commitment to serve his country and that he went through the rigor of training, I think that in and of itself speaks volumes to Kirby's level of courage and integrity and to his discipline. Don't get me wrong though, Kirby was certainly not all work and no play, not by a long shot. He liked cars and motorcycles, he loved taking road trips and being outdoors. He was a foodie, he loved trying new foods. He loved hanging out with his family and listening to music, going fishing. All in all, Kirby just sounds like a really cool, down-to-earth, very well-rounded guy. Following his time in the military, Kirby went on to own and to manage multiple successful businesses. At one point, he owned and operated 2 separate liquor stores, one in Ripley and one in Boonville, and both of these ventures were incredibly lucrative, and he went on to sell both of them for, I assume, a pretty decent profit. He owned and managed several profitable rental properties, and at the time our story takes place, he actually owned and operated a new business called Mississippi Gold, Silver, and Coin Exchange. While many people have gone on to refer to Kirby as a jack of all trades, he would never have embarked on any of his business ventures if he hadn't been incredibly passionate about the actual businesses themselves. Actually, Kirby's sister has gone on to say that she believes that that is why Kirby was so incredibly successful, because not only did he never do anything halfway, but he never specifically did anything just for the money. The things he committed to were because he had a genuine interest in those particular industries, and then the money that came along with those things, well, that was just a perk. And ooh, girl, what a perk it was. By the time Kirby was in his 30s, he was officially a self-made millionaire. And not only did he know how to make money, but it also seems as though he knew how to manage money and how to make his money work for him. So throughout most, if not all, of Kirby's adult life, he was very financially stable. He was very capable of taking care of himself, as well as also indulging in his hobbies and his side projects. And of course, Kirby was proud of all of his business accolades. I mean, rightfully so. But no matter what he accomplished, no matter how many successful businesses he ran or investments he made, no matter the number in his bank account, what always meant the most to Kirby, more than anything else in this entire world, were his children. Any person who knew Kirby could tell you without hesitation that those kids were Kirby's absolute greatest pride and joy. He and a former partner of his, a woman named Whitney, they welcomed their son and Kirby's first child back in May of 2018. And then a few years later, he and his final partner, Caitlyn Spence, welcomed their daughter together in July of 2022. Caitlyn and Kirby had been together for a few years prior to the birth of their daughter, and after she was born, the three of them lived together at Kirby's home in Boonville, Mississippi. Oh, and actually, after their daughter was born, Caitlyn's parents, Jeff and Karen, they decided to come in from Pennsylvania to stay with Caitlyn and Kirby just for a little bit to help them adjust to life with a new baby. From my understanding, their initial plan was to stay with Kirby and Caitlyn for, I don't know, maybe a week or two while they figured out their new routine. However, what actually ended up happening was that they stayed there at Kirby's for the next couple of months. Kirby owned a beautiful piece of property located on County Road 600 in Tippah County. His house was just over 2,200 square feet, and it sat on a 10-acre plot of land that just so happened to butt up to a second plot of land that he owned that he called his farm. And this home and this property, they were Kirby's absolute dream. It provided him with over 100 acres of basically everything he loved to do outdoors. There was a pond where he could go fishing. There was space for his cars, space for his motorcycles. A lot of the acreage was also wooded, so this gave Kirby his own personal hunting space. I think he was a deer hunter, so all of this space was definitely a perk in that regard. But then even if you put all of that aside, all of the reasons that the property was perfect for Kirby himself, it was also a perfect place for him to raise his children. They had a ton of space to run around and to explore and to just have fun and to be kids. And if this was the end of the story, things really would have been picturesque, wouldn't they? Unfortunately, though, we know all too well that had the story ended there, I certainly wouldn't be talking about it here today. So sadly, my friends, that does bring us to Friday, December 2nd, 2022. A day that for most of Kirby's family started out completely and totally ordinary. They had absolutely no reason to believe waking up that morning that that day would totally and completely turn their lives upside down forever. And it all started with a single text message to Kirby's mom. That morning, so the morning of December 2nd, Caitlyn reached out to Kirby's mom, Maddie, to ask her if she had seen or heard from Kirby at any point recently. Now, immediately, this was weird to Maddie because Caitlyn lived with Kirby, so you'd think if anyone was going to know where he'd be, it'd be her. Clearly, that wasn't the case though, so Maddie started asking Caitlyn a few questions, just hoping to help piece together what might be going on. According to Caitlyn, Kirby hadn't come home the night before, which was very out of character for him. That alone would have been worrisome enough. But then as Maddie and Caitlyn continued talking, Maddie started to realize that it wasn't just the previous night and that morning that Caitlyn was saying she hadn't seen Kirby. She was actually telling Maddie that the last time that she had seen Kirby was Wednesday morning. She claimed that when she had left the home that morning, Kirby had still been sleeping in their bed and that she hadn't seen him since. So it actually wasn't like 12 hours that Kirby was unaccounted for, like Caitlyn had first led Maddie to believe it was. Based on the story that Caitlyn was presenting, she hadn't spoken to or laid eyes on Kirby for over 48 hours at this point. And then, even more concerning than that, was that all of Kirby's vehicles were still parked at the house. So if he had gone somewhere, he definitely hadn't gone alone. At least not as far as they could tell. Basically, it seems like the more they talked and the more realizations the two came to, the more confusing the entire situation seemed to become. Now, eventually this conversation did graduate from text messages to a phone call. Obviously, by that point, both Maddie and Caitlyn were seemingly pretty worried. So Maddie was in the process of reaching out to basically anyone and everyone that she could think of to see if maybe someone else knew where he was. And meanwhile, Caitlyn had asked Maddie for the phone number of one of Kirby's friends that she claimed she was going to try to contact to see if maybe Kirby had gone somewhere with him. Unfortunately, though, after speaking to this friend of Kirby's, Caitlyn was informed that Kirby was not with him, which was definitely disheartening to Maddie when Caitlyn called to relay this to her, because they've been looking for Kirby for hours at this point. They're gradually, one by one, hearing back from everyone they reached out to, and each and every time, it seems to be the same answer. Nobody had seen or heard from Kirby since the last time that Caitlyn claimed to have seen him. And they're starting to run out of options at this point, which is making the situation scarier and scarier. I mean, they weren't completely out of options yet, but they definitely had a lot less now than when they'd started. That said, though, when Caitlyn had called Kirby's friend, he had actually suggested to her that maybe she should go and check Kirby's deer stand. If you'll remember, Kirby was an avid hunter. He had all of that property out there in the middle of the Mississippi woods, and he had set it up to where he could hunt whenever he wanted, all on his own property. So had Kirby gone out into the woods to his deer stand? Had something happened out there? Was he hurt or was he stuck? There were now tons of new scenarios running through Kirby's mom's brain. None of them were great, but I have to imagine that they were at least starting to give her a little bit of hope. Was there actually a possibility that maybe he was somewhere close and that maybe everything could still turn out to be okay? Obviously, now she's super eager to find out if in fact her son is out by his deer stand, if he's okay, if he's hurt. She just wants to know what the hell's going on, you know? Actually, she ended up offering to Caitlyn to call around and to see if perhaps she could get a hold of someone that might be able to go out to Kirby's and to accompany her out to check the area around Kirby's deer stand. Because mind you, not only is this deer stand quite a ways back in the woods, up some pretty difficult terrain, Caitlyn, she still has a newborn baby there with her that she's going to have to either have someone watch while she goes out into the woods, or she's going to have to strap this little baby to her so that she can go schlepping up to Kirby's deer stand. And while that second scenario sounds like an absolute nightmare to me, in spite of Maddie's offer, Caitlyn declined the help, and she instead told her that she was going to take care of the baby and take care of the dog, and that as soon as she possibly could, she would then bundle the baby up with her, and the two of them together would walk out through the woods and up to Kirby's deer stand to see if he was there. And I don't know about you, but immediately this seems weird to me for two reasons. Reason one being, I can't think of a single new mother in the world that's going to strap their baby to them in order to trudge through the woods alone, in the cold, in December, while looking for their missing boyfriend. And two, as far as anyone was aware at this time, Caitlyn's parents were still in town, so why weren't they gonna watch the baby for her? Or you know what? Better yet, why didn't they go up and look around the deer stand? Because not only is this baby just 4 months old, therefore should not be out in the middle of the woods in December in Mississippi anyway, but she had also apparently just been fighting the flu within the preceding days. So yeah, it's all very weird, and it definitely raises more questions than answers, in my opinion. And you'll get answers to all of these questions eventually. Right now, I'm just kind of giving you what my train of thought was the first time I was looking into this case. Nevertheless, though, after this, Caitlyn and Maddie, they get off the phone, and according to Maddie, it was then over a half an hour before Caitlyn finally called her back. And something that actually stuck out to Maddie was that, from her perspective in this phone call back, Caitlyn sounded completely normal when she was talking to her. Although she claimed to have just hiked up a big-ass hill and through the woods all the way to Kirby's deer stand with her 4-month-old baby strapped to her chest, according to Maddie, she did not sound out of breath. Her speech and her breathing didn't sound labored. I believe Maddie's exact verbiage was that Caitlyn was speaking in a normal and effortless tone. And I don't know about you, but I can't even walk up the steps postpartum without getting winded, so I don't know. Much like it stuck out to Maddie, I too feel like it's worth noting and worth keeping in mind. So supposedly Caitlyn was on her way back from Kirby's deer stand, updating Maddie over the phone as to what she had found, which was apparently nothing. And that is when all of a sudden, Maddie hears Caitlyn just repeatedly and frantically start saying Kirby's name before the call then disconnected. So at this point, Maddie, she's done. She has had enough of this. Clearly, something is wrong. She can't get back a hold of Caitlyn. There was obviously some sort of development in what was going on prior to their call disconnecting. She can't wait any longer to know what the hell might be going on with her son. And I don't blame her for this one bit, because I cannot even imagine what a whirlwind nightmare that day had already been for her up to that point. And as sad as it is, we haven't even covered the half of it yet. At any rate, though, she immediately gets up and she walks out of work because she's not waiting a single more second to go to Kirby's herself and to find out what is going on. The problem with that, though, was that she had at least a 10 to 15 minute drive ahead of her from work to get to Kirby's house. So once she got out of work and got into her car, she actually ended up calling Kirby's stepdad, so her husband, and she asked him to please get to Kirby's as fast as he possibly could. And when he asked her why, all she could tell him was that she didn't exactly know what was going on, but that she just knew something was very, very wrong. And hearing this, Kirby's stepdad, his name's Dwayne, by the way, this was all he needed to hear to get him into his truck and on the road to Kirby's house. From what I was able to gather, he was only maybe like a 5-ish minute drive away, versus Maddie, who, depending on traffic, she's gonna be either double or maybe even triple that. So cut to a few minutes later, Dwayne pulls up to Kirby's, he parks in the driveway, gets out of his truck, and he practically ran towards Kirby's house. And at first, as he was walking towards the house, he didn't really hear anything. Actually, if anything, it was like eerily quiet. It wasn't until he walked past Kirby's truck and was about to step into the garage when all of a sudden he heard Kirby's girlfriend begin screaming. Mind you, he's already pretty on edge because all he knew was that something nondescript was wrong at Kirby's house. So hearing this, he whips around to see what's going on, and that is when he saw Caitlyn kneeling on the ground, holding the baby, and screaming into the phone. Based on how she was talking, she was obviously on the phone with 911. So Dwayne starts looking around the scene. He's trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And that is when he saw it. Just a few feet away from where he stood, laid what appeared to be Kirby's body. And I say appeared to be because only Kirby's boots were actually visible to him from where he was standing. Kirby's body appeared to have been covered up, and then on top of that covering sat Kirby's truck's toolbox. And initially, in all of this chaos, Dwayne actually thought that the toolbox had somehow fallen onto Kirby and crushed him. He actually started trying to frantically push the toolbox off of Kirby, and that was when it dawned on him that if the toolbox had fallen on Kirby and that had been the cause of this accident, then why in the hell would Kirby be covered up with the cover underneath the toolbox? Truly, what he was looking at, it really didn't make any sense. And he actually ended up asking Kirby's girlfriend, like, why is he covered up like this? Dwayne did end up pulling the cover back in order to get a look at Kirby's face and to see if by some chance there was anything he could do to help him. But he said that just upon a first glance at Kirby, he could tell that he was way beyond medical intervention. That was not all he noticed, by the way, because in looking at Kirby, he also noticed that it appeared as though Kirby had been shot. From there, the next few hours, I have to imagine, all whizzed by in sort of a chaotic blur. Thankfully, law enforcement and emergency personnel responded very quickly to the scene, as did Kirby's mother and other family members and even some very close family friends. One by one, family and friends trickled onto the property as the horrific news of Kirby's death started to spread. Kirby's family and friends and his closest inner circle, they were all super tight-knit. So hearing that he had passed away, all everyone wanted to do was to come out and to show his family their support and to be there for them in this unimaginably difficult time. Meanwhile, as first responders were questioning Caitlyn and questioning Dwayne and speaking to those that were directly involved with the discovery of Kirby's body, apparently Caitlyn began immediately speaking of Kirby and the situation as if it had been something that was self-inflicted. Within all of the answers that she gave to questions and statements that she gave to police, it seemed as though Caitlyn was really trying to push this narrative that Kirby had ended his own life and that the aftermath of that was what they were looking at. And while obviously police have to entertain most theories and possibilities, Kirby's family, from the moment they heard this, they knew it was preposterous. No matter how adamant Caitlyn was that this had been a suicide, that Kirby had done this to himself, it did not take officers long at all to rule out that theory, considering that there was no weapon anywhere around Kirby's body at all. And also, he clearly didn't cover himself and put the toolbox on himself and shoot himself and get rid of the gun. The suicide angle just did not make any sense to anyone that took even 4 seconds to look over the scene and to look at Kirby. This was very clearly a homicide. Kirby had clearly been murdered, and now the police, as well as the FBI, needed to try and figure out who had done this and why. What kind of selfish, soulless monster would so callously murder this innocent, kind father of 2 and then just abandon his body outside his very own home? It is sick. Not to mention that it was absolutely befuddling to his family. Kirby didn't have a single indecent bone in his body. He was the kindest, sweetest, gentlest person. Everyone that knew him loved him. When asked if he had ever had any enemies, I'm pretty sure that the family was only able to think of one single person that Kirby had ever had issues with. And if you're like, oh, it's that person, nope, because they died before Kirby did. So it didn't take much to rule them out. And beyond that, everyone was stumped as to who on earth might actually want to hurt Kirby. So obviously, one of the first things that law enforcement needed to try and figure out, in hopes of pointing their investigation in any one particular direction, was when exactly Kirby was killed. And given the fact that Caitlyn was claiming to have not seen him since Wednesday, and it's Friday afternoon, evening-ish at this point, that's not really all that helpful. Thankfully, though, police were able to answer this question of when pretty quickly into their preliminary search of Kirby's property. Obviously, they were going to search his home, his property, his garage, his vehicles. They were looking for not just evidence of the murder, but they were also seeing what they could find that might hopefully help them piece together Kirby's final movements. And it was throughout this search that evidence was actually found within Kirby's truck, as well as within his pants pockets, that helped them to deduce their answer. Evidently, Kirby had gone grocery shopping at a local Kroger store on November 30th, so the afternoon following the last time that Caitlyn claims to have seen him, and this was brought to light thanks to a receipt that police ended up finding in his pants pocket. Eventually, they were able to verify via Kroger CCTV footage that Kirby had been the one to go into the store and to make those purchases. He'd also been alone when he'd done so. But what really helped them to nail down the approximate time of Kirby's death was the fact that the groceries that he purchased while he was at Kroger, they were still sitting in Kroger bags in his truck. And since they'd been able to confirm with CCTV footage from a fire station between Kirby's home and the Kroger store that Kirby appeared to have gone straight home following his shopping trip, and that he was still wearing the same clothes when his body was found as he had been when he was spotted on the supermarket video footage, all this led police to believe that Kirby was ambushed pretty much as soon as he stepped out of his truck on the afternoon of November 30th, before he even had a chance to carry his groceries into his home. Someone had to have been basically laying in wait for him to return home in order for them to catch him completely off guard. My personal assumption with this is that this was a calculated move by Kirby's killer, or killers, because not only was Kirby a Marine, therefore trained in the art of firefight and self-preservation, but he was also known to carry on a regular basis. And I don't know about you, but the last thing on earth I'm trying to do is get into a gunfight with a trained Marine. I mean, I'm not trying to get into a gunfight, a knife fight, fist fight, or otherwise with anyone, but you get what I'm saying. I think that the only way that whomever was responsible for Kirby's death figured that they were going to be able to complete the task unscathed was to completely blindside him. And they were able to basically confirm this following Kirby's autopsy, because the medical examiner did ultimately conclude that there were no signs of any sort of fight or attempt at defending himself anywhere on Kirby's body. He had absolutely no idea that this attack on his life was coming, which honestly is just a really cowardly move in my opinion, but I digress. When speaking to police, as well as to Kirby's family, Caitlyn once again claimed that upon walking out the back door of Kirby's home, she had walked straight through the backyard and straight up a pretty steep and pretty precarious hill in order to go to Kirby's deer stand to look for him. And again, she opted to do this with a baby strapped to her chest in the middle of December. She chose that route instead of taking Kirby's side-by-side up a much easier to maneuver trail. And I guess that's a choice, but okay. And then she claimed that it was on her walk back down from the deer stand. This time she did, I guess, walk down the nice cleared out path. Go figure. But this is apparently when she saw a glimpse of Kirby's boots lying on the ground, which is what prompted her to start screaming his name before she disconnected her call with Maddie. Now, I'm going to take this moment here as an opportunity to watch with you a video that Kirby's sister Casey posted to Facebook, and what this video shows is the exact route that Caitlyn claims to have taken that day, and I think it'll also help to kind of explain the layout of Kirby's property and where he was found.
This is Casey. I'm Kirby's sister, and I am going to video the path that the person living in the home with Kirby at the time he was killed.
Caitlyn. They didn't put her name out there at first when they first started this Facebook page, but obviously now that things have gone the way that they have, we can say with 100% certainty that she's talking about Caitlyn here.
Says that she took on Friday morning when she was going to look for him. Currently I'm standing in Kirby's living room. The person told us that that morning as she was going to go out to look for him to see if he was in his deer stand, that she walked straight out this back door, straight up the hill, all the way up the hill, and then to the deer stand. So I'm just going to show you the terrain that she would have had to cross to do that.
Like, you can see immediately that there is no freaking way this woman did this with a 4-month-old baby strapped to her chest. Get real.
She claimed that she had her 13-pound baby attached to her, wearing her at the time. It is a little muddy today, so excuse me while I walk through. Okay. She said she walked straight out the door, which is there. Sorry, that's my friend. Straight up the hill. The reason that that is relevant is because Kirby's body was laying next to those toolboxes where they are, about in this area. So if she had looked right, she would have seen his body. But she says that she did not, that she walked directly up this hill.
Basically, what Caitlyn is trying to do here is explain why she didn't see Kirby's body until she was on her way back from the deer stand. Because if she had gone up the cleared out path to the deer stand in the first place, she would have seen Kirby's body immediately.
Okay, as you can see, my attempt up the hill failed.
And she didn't have a baby strapped to her chest. Like, I get it was muddy and perhaps the terrain conditions weren't exactly the same on these 2 separate days, but it has to make you think.
I'm standing on the back porch looking at the hill directly in front of me. You can see where I slid down the hill. I am not able to go up that hill. I have attempted several times since his death and have not been able on my own. And I am of much smaller stature and not carrying a baby. Also, just so you're aware or can see, this is what you're looking at when you walk out the back porch. So, this hill, very steep. Also, behind the air conditioner unit there, Kirby's side-by-side was parked. So, typically, if Kirby went into the woods to the deer stand to hunt, he would have gone on his side-by-side. He would not have walked that distance, nor would she have, in my opinion. But you can see that there is, on down here, kind of a less steep trail that Kirby had made to go up and then over to the deer stand, which is way down there. But of course, had she walked this direction to go up that hill in attempts to look for him in the deer stand, which is what she said she was doing, then she would have been walking directly to where his body laid, which was right here.
So, I don't know. I think that just kind of helps to visualize more of the layout and kind of helps you see why, in my opinion, Caitlyn's story was bullshit. And what's even more wild, because mind you, we're still only at the tip of the iceberg here, but apparently Caitlyn flat out admitted that she had left the house and run multiple errands between the time that she had last seen Kirby and the time that she had discovered his body. How the fuck do you walk out of that house multiple times and straight up miss your boyfriend lying dead next to his truck? Especially when you consider that, okay, you mean to tell me that this woman's boyfriend and the father of her child is missing for 2 days, yet his truck is clearly visible, and she never once walked out to the truck to see if he left his phone in there, and maybe that's why he wasn't in touch. I don't know, it's weird. And don't even get me started on the fact that she waited 2 days before she was like, I wonder where my live-in boyfriend / daughter's father is. Sure, I haven't seen him in a while. I suppose you could say that I'm in no position to judge, as I've clearly never been through anything like this before, but 1000% my gut instinct when researching this case is that Caitlyn Spence, she ain't looking good. Oh, and BT Dubs, Kirby's phone, it was in fact in his truck. I believe police found it plugged into his car charger, and I assume just like sitting on the center console. God, I cannot even begin to imagine what this poor family was going through. Knowing that this beloved member of their family, not only was he murdered, but that he had been sitting undiscovered right outside his very own home for 2 days. As I'm sure you can understand, they were heartbroken. They were devastated, and they were just completely destroyed by this. Eventually, as the investigation really started to kind of take over Kirby's property and certain areas became off limits, the family, to me, it sounds like they collectively decided to leave Kirby's. They wanted to leave police to what they needed to do and to instead move their gathering to Kirby's mom and stepdad's house. This way, they could still be together and grieve together and support one another without having to worry about being in the way of officers or, worse, potentially interfering with possible evidence. It was actually once they had kind of stepped away from the scene and gotten some time to really think and to assess the situation that Kirby's sister Casey was like, Caitlyn, where's your folks? Because as I've mentioned quite a few times, Caitlyn's parents had been staying with she and Kirby ever since their daughter had been born in July. So for 4 months at this point, they had been right there up until at least Thanksgiving, which was only 6 days before Kirby had been murdered. So it was really weird to Casey and to Kirby's whole family that these two had been hanging around for months, but now all of a sudden, right when all this is going down, that's when they're nowhere to be seen. Evidently, Caitlyn told Casey that her parents had actually left and headed back home on Tuesday, which would have been just 24 hours give or take, prior to Kirby's death. According to Caitlyn, she had gotten home from work, done the exchange with the baby, and then her parents had gotten like straight on the road. And I'm not sure if Casey actually caught this in the moment or really had time to think about it. I'm sure in hindsight, she's dissected everything that has ever come out of Caitlyn's mouth. But in the early days following Kirby's death, she had no reason to believe that Caitlyn was telling her anything other than the truth. But again, in retrospect, this is weird because remember how I said that Kirby's daughter was getting over the flu? Well, evidently, so were Caitlyn's parents. Caitlyn had texted everyone that Monday and let them know that her parents were sick. This was post-COVID time, so I guess people were still sending out national alerts every time someone they'd ever been around caught a sniffle. So I guess that's what Caitlyn was doing. Like, hey, mom and dad are sick. Sorry you guys were around them. Look out for XYZ symptoms. Good luck and Godspeed. And in my opinion, I think it's weird that they're sick enough one day for you to tell everyone that was at Thanksgiving with them that they need to watch out for symptoms, but they're healthy enough the very next day to load up into the car for a 15-hour-long road trip. Like, sure, it's possible, but again, it just seems weird. As did basically everything Caitlyn went on to do in the wake of Kirby's death. For starters, her conscience, in my opinion, seemed pretty guilty basically from jump. Pretty early in the investigation, an FBI agent pulled Caitlyn aside while she was at the house just to tell her, like, hey, at some point we're gonna have to sit down and have a conversation with you, which I feel like we all know is fairly common, because Caitlyn wasn't just his significant other, but she was also the person who found his body. Obviously, they're going to want to sit down and have a formal conversation with her. Anyone in their right mind should have expected that. However, Caitlyn took this to mean that she was immediately a suspect. She broke down into hysterical tears right there in the middle of Kirby's home and basically pleaded to Casey, who was there with her at the time, just begging her to acknowledge that she had to know that she would never hurt her brother. Again, this is something that in hindsight, everyone's like, whoa, that's weird. But at the time, Casey's just looking at this girl as her brother's distraught girlfriend. Like I said, she held no suspicion towards Caitlyn at the beginning of all of this. So for her to inherently believe that just because law enforcement wanted to speak to her, that now everyone was going to think she was responsible, it just seems like a bit of a leap, right? And poor Casey, she's so sweet and she's trying to calm her down and console her about this. She told her it probably wasn't anything like that and that surely they were going to be talking to anyone and everyone that Kirby had ever been close with. And while Caitlyn did seem to calm down enough after talking to Casey, and although she did stay with Kirby's mom and stepdad temporarily following his death, it kind of seems like this was sort of a turning point as far as the relationship between the two families was concerned. Basically, as soon as police released Kirby's house from being an active crime scene, Caitlyn packed up she and the baby and she moved back into the home. And her parents also came back down from Pennsylvania to Mississippi, moving back into Kirby's home with her to stay there indefinitely, I guess. And this kind of seems to be where Caitlyn's relationship with Kirby's family started to dissolve. But before we get into that, I'm going to take my break, throw on my lashes, and when we get back, what the actual fuck is up with Caitlyn and her parents? Don't go nowhere. All right, so we're back, and just before our break, things were definitely starting to get kind of weird with Kirby's girlfriend and with her parents. And unfortunately, from this point on in the story, that doesn't really go away. So I think it was 2 days after Kirby's body was discovered. Yeah, it was Sunday, December 4th. Kirby's mom and sister, so Maddie and Casey, they took it upon themselves to kind of start looking into some of the logistics of Kirby's afterlife responsibilities. They had to start going through his belongings. They had to start planning for his memorial service. They needed to find his will. Just all of these incidental things that, difficult and painful as they may be, they have to be taken care of following someone's passing, and typically pretty promptly. So they load into the car and they begin to make their way over to Kirby's. Kirby had always told his family that should anything ever happen to him, his last will and testament was located in one of his safes. Granted, Kirby was a young, healthy guy, so I don't think he necessarily expected that they'd ever really need to use that information, but being someone who worked in a business where he was dealing with precious metals and incredibly valuable and rare coins on a daily basis, Kirby knew that it was better for him to be safe than to be sorry. And although Maddie had gone into Kirby's safe room the night that his body was discovered just to make sure that he hadn't been robbed, once she had opened the safes and taken note that everything seemed to be in order, she didn't even think about grabbing his will or like any other important documents like that in that exact moment. At that point, she was just kind of doing her due diligence and making sure that police had all of the information that they might possibly need. She wasn't even taking into consideration the important documentation or pieces of paperwork that she might need. Nevertheless, though, the important takeaway here is that Maddie had, to my knowledge, always known Kirby's safe codes, and on the day that his body was discovered, she had been able to access these safes no issue with the codes that she had always had. And to clarify, when I say safes, I do in fact mean safes. Kirby had an entire room in his home dedicated to his precious metal business and to securing his own personal valuables. He had safes full of gold bars, full of silver, coins. He had guns in some of his safes, important family documents, his will. Overall, Casey has gone on to estimate that Kirby likely had close to, if not over, $1 million worth of valuables within that one single safe room. So cut back to Maddie and Casey headed over to access those very same safes. Well, they were in for a very, very big surprise. Actually, they were in for a couple pretty decent surprises. These surprises included, but were not limited to, a big-ass cardboard handwritten sign that Caitlyn and her parents had apparently crafted and attached to the side of Kirby's truck in order to ward off visitors. And while the thought of that, I guess, is definitely odd, from Maddie and Casey's standpoint, this didn't apply to them, so it absolutely did not stop them from proceeding into the home, as was their right. Now, at this time, I guess Caitlyn wasn't there, so it was just her parents at Kirby's house, and they were watching the baby. And although things did start out friendly and cordial enough, they most certainly did not stay that way. As soon as Kirby's mom said anything about going into the safe room or about getting into the safes, Caitlyn's dad seems to have kind of snapped, I guess you could say. It seems like from that point on, he just could not hold his composure or his facade any longer. Right then and there, he basically started accusing Kirby's mom and Kirby's sister of trying to make it seem as though Caitlyn was guilty of what had happened to Kirby. He told them that he didn't appreciate them coming down to his house and trying to cause problems. Like, excuse me, sir, but I'm gonna need you to take several seats because it's not your home. You do not make the rules, and if anyone is making your family look bad right now, it's you. Truly, I do not know how on earth Maddie and Casey managed to hold their composure through all of this, but through some superhuman level of strength, they did. They did manage to slightly de-escalate the situation, at least enough, but I think we can all understand that this left a very bad taste in their mouth as far as the Spences were concerned. And honestly, the more they walked around Kirby's house and the more they really started to take in, the more and more uncomfortable things really did start to become. Not only had the safe codes been changed, which had already given them some pause, but apparently the doorknobs and all of the locks had been changed as well. Yeah, I guess this could have been written off as a security measure. I mean, Kirby had just been killed right outside that very home, and as far as everyone was aware at that moment, this mysterious unnamed killer was still at large. Who knows? Maybe they were going to try and come back later and rob the place or something. Honestly, nobody really knew which way was up at this point, so I don't really think that anyone would have faulted Caitlyn and her parents for trying to reinforce some of the security measures around the house. However, what there was absolutely no explanation for was later that same afternoon when Kirby's mom, Maddie, discovered that Caitlyn's dad, Jeff's vehicle was bursting at the seams with a shitload of Kirby silver. Yeah, like I said, I would love to hear a reasonable explanation for that one. Basically, I guess what had happened was at one point, Kirby's mom had stepped out of the house to kind of collect herself and to try and calm down because, like I said, things had escalated very quickly earlier in the afternoon during this whole visit. So understandably, at one point, Maddie felt like she needed some air. However, when she stepped outside, rather than being met with fresh air and respite, she instead noticed that Jeff's car had been parked in sort of a weird configuration between the garage of the house and Kirby's truck. And given all of the absolute tomfoolery that she had already dealt with up to this point, out of curiosity, she decided to walk over to the car and just, to take a peek inside, and sure enough, all it took was a cursory glance for her to realize that Jeff was absolutely attempting to make off with a ton of Kirby's precious metals. Now, obviously, Maddie confronted Jeff about this because, what the actual hell are you doing? But then this conversation escalated into another argument, and just, it was all starting to become increasingly clear to Kirby's family that something was up. At the very least, something was up with Caitlyn's dad, but realistically, the whole Spence trio was starting to look suspicious. Now, prior to leaving Kirby's that evening, Maddie and Casey were able to get back some of the load of silver that Jeff had in his car. Basically, they tried to gather up everything they possibly could with their 4 combined hands before they left. Don't get me wrong though, it wasn't like they were leaving this is over type leaving. They were leaving you'll be hearing from our attorney type leaving. Remember, this was on a Sunday, and by the time they left the house that afternoon, they had every intention of retaining legal representation first thing the following morning. They wanted to make sure that moving forward, they did everything in their power to protect Kirby's assets and to protect Kirby's fortune. Because I don't care if he's Kirby's daughter's grandfather or not, none of what belonged to Kirby belonged to crusty ass Jeff. I just cannot believe that in this unimaginably difficult and devastating time, this is the shit that these people are putting this family through. I mean, I can, given the outcome of this story, but I don't know, it never ceases to amaze me how truly heartless some people can be. Now, Kirby's mom did actually end up going back to Kirby's house later that same evening, so still December 4th. Because I guess after speaking to Caitlyn, she was hoping that maybe they could all come together and smooth things over. However, when she got to the house, Caitlyn and her parents had the doors barricaded shut, and they refused to open them to speak to Maddie. Thankfully though, this secondary trip to Kirby's wasn't totally fruitless, I guess you could say. Because out of fear for her own safety, Maddie had actually requested that a police officer escort her when she went back to Kirby's, just given how completely out of pocket Jeff had been acting the first time she was there that day. So rightfully so, she wasn't taking any chances. And although the Spences did refuse to let she or the officer into the home at any point during the secondary visit, Maddie did take some time to speak to the officer and to recount everything that had happened earlier during the initial visit. And when she was done explaining how she'd already found a massive amount of Kirby's silver in Jeff's car, only some of which she was able to recover, she looked at the cop and she was like, you know what? I bet if I were to go over to that car and to look in there again right now, he would probably already have it reloaded back down with more silver. And sure as shit, she and the cop walked over to the car, they looked in it, and boom, a whole new load of Kirby's silver just sitting right there inside Jeff's car. Unfreaking believable, right? This silver and this fortune was meant to be left to Kirby's children. So where does this man get off just trying to use it to line his pockets and to fund his life? I mean, later when we get into some background on Jeff Spence, it's going to seem a lot less shocking because homeboy is just a grimy lowlife in general, but good lord, to essentially steal from 2 little children, diabolical. Kirby's mom was ultimately designated as the executor of Kirby's estate, and so just 2 days after the absolute chaos of Sunday the 4th, Maddie and Casey were back at Kirby's to take inventory of Kirby's belongings and to essentially make sure that everything was documented and that nothing else went missing. Unfortunately though, throughout this process, it was quickly discovered that quite a few other things were already missing. Among these missing items were the firearm that Kirby carried every day. He had a bunch of guns in total, but specifically he had a small pistol that he carried with him everywhere. And to my knowledge, even to this day, that gun has never been found. And then another thing that alarmingly the family has never been able to recover is the sync box to Kirby's home security system. As previously mentioned, Kirby had upwards of 7 figures worth of valuables on his property, so it shouldn't really come as a surprise when I tell you that he had that place locked down and protected like Fort freaking Knox. He had a security system. He had locks on everything. His valuables were in safes. He had cameras. He had alarms. Actually, given the extensive amount of surveillance that he had around his property, that was one of the first things that his family urged law enforcement to look into. They were like, Kirby has cameras all up and down this property. All you need to do is review that footage from the security cameras and boom, you will probably find your killer. Unfortunately, though, when they did go to look into this, what they actually found was that the sync box, or I guess kind of like the base console station that held all of the data, well, inexplicably, that piece of hardware had suddenly gone missing. And then, frustratingly, beyond that, Kirby didn't have like a subscription service to his security company's cloud. So I guess that meant that outside of viewing any activity live while it was happening, the only other way, to my understanding, that he would have been able to get old footage would have been downloading it from the sync box onto an SD card. And obviously, without the sync box, there would be no downloading any past footage, meaning that any potential video of what had happened to Kirby was just gone. Now, by this point, tensions between the two families, between the Spences and the Carpenters, I mean, you could cut tension in any room they were all in with a knife. Lines had pretty much obviously been drawn in the sand at this point. Kirby's family had retained legal counsel. Caitlyn had obtained legal counsel. Neither family felt even remotely comfortable being around the other any longer. Like, when I say things fell apart quick, I mean things fell apart quick. And actually, one of the last times that a majority of Kirby's family saw Caitlyn was a couple of weeks after his death at his memorial service. Kirby's funeral was on December 17th. It took over 2 weeks for the crime lab to complete his autopsy and then to return his body to his family. I guess, given the time of year, they were really backed up, and so it took longer than normal for them to take care of everything that they needed to. Kirby was laid to rest in Lebanon Baptist Church Cemetery, and on the back of his headstone it reads, quote, "As the rain begins to fall, it reminds me that we are liquid for a while, and then we are shot back into the atmosphere to only return in memory here on earth, but eternally shine with those whom have loved and lost as we have traveled this somehow perfect, imperfect journey, better known as life." And that passage was actually written by Kirby himself, which, I don't know, is just hauntingly beautiful. And while the day itself was also beautiful, it was a beautiful tribute to Kirby and a beautiful celebration of his life and an opportunity for those who knew and loved him to come together and to mourn with one another. People still couldn't help but notice a couple of weird things, once again, about the Spences. Like, sure, they were there. Well, actually roll that back because only Caitlyn and Jeff went. For unknown reasons, Karen decided not to attend, which in my opinion in and of itself is weird. But just because they were there didn't mean that they weren't still just oozing weirdness and awkwardness from every pore on their body. Like I said, these people couldn't even be in the same room as Kirby's family without just palpable tension. Thankfully, though, in spite of this tension and in spite of most of Kirby's family really starting to feel like some type of way about the Spences by this point, to my knowledge, everything going on between these families did not take away from Kirby or his memory or why people were truly there that day. Actually, it wouldn't be until a couple of days after Kirby's funeral that things would, really come to a head. If you'll remember, we're, mid-December by this point? So it was just a couple of days before Christmas when Maddie got a text from Caitlyn letting her know that she was actually going to be taking the baby to Pennsylvania for a week or so to celebrate Christmas with her grandparents. And basically this text was more of a courtesy than anything. She was reaching out to let her know that they were going to be leaving, and she wanted to know if Maddie wanted to come and see the baby before they left. Obviously, this was an offer that Maddie could not pass on, so she made her way to Kirby's house and spent some time with Caitlyn and with the baby, and then she actually ended up being there long enough that she watched Caitlyn load her granddaughter up into her car and drive away. Caitlyn's parents had also left the house by this point, and they were headed back home as well. So now that the house was empty, Maddie actually took this opportunity to walk through her son's house in peace, to walk through and to mourn and to just reflect, without the Spences breathing down her neck. That said, though, as she was walking through the home, something about it felt just kind of off to Maddie. It just felt empty, more like an abandoned house than a house whose residents were simply on vacation. And so, as she was walking around, she started opening cabinets and drawers and just, kind of seeing, what was up. And when she got to Kirby's bedroom and started opening dresser drawers, that is when her fears were confirmed. Not only was the baby stuff as well as Caitlyn's stuff completely gone, but in one of the dresser drawers, Maddie found what appeared to be handwritten wills for both Caitlyn and her father, Jeff. Both of these wills were dated just days after Kirby's death, and I think we can collectively all agree that that is weird. I mean, sure, have a will. That's not what I'm saying is weird. Especially not if you're elderly, like Caitlyn's parents, or you have a child to think about, like Caitlyn did. In those instances, the responsible thing to do is to have a will. What I'm saying is weird about these wills in particular was the handwritten nature of them, and the fact that they had been left behind in this empty dresser in this, I guess now, abandoned home. What on earth prompted y'all to sit down and have this family will writing party? And then why did you leave them behind like this to be found? These questions are rhetorical, by the way. I have my own theories and speculation on this, but I would also love to know what you think. At any rate, though, I don't really think that at this point, Kirby's family gave half a brown Crayola about the Spences and keeping in touch with them specifically. Rather, their biggest concern here, with the apparent fact that Caitlyn wouldn't be coming back, was Kirby's baby daughter. Thankfully, they were able to keep in touch with Caitlyn for a while, and in these conversations, you better believe that the only thing their family cared to talk to her about was Kirby's daughter. They even actually went as far as to send checks to Caitlyn as sort of like a child support situation, all just to help to make sure that Kirby's little girl was being well taken care of. Sadly, though, in spite of this, in spite of everything they were doing to try and keep these lines of communication open, gradually as the days and weeks turned into months, communication between Caitlyn and Kirby's family dwindled down to absolutely nothing. They went weeks without receiving any sort of update on Kirby's daughter. Even as her first birthday approached, and they basically started begging for an update and for any sort of contact, they were still met with radio silence. They ended up going so long without receiving confirmation from Caitlyn that Kirby's daughter was okay that they actually decided to reach out to law enforcement local to where Caitlyn was staying. Again, not because they cared so much about what was going on with Caitlyn specifically, they more so just wanted to know that the baby was okay. So they provided law enforcement with the address that they'd been sending the child support checks to, and graciously, the local police did agree to head over to the house and to check on the baby. But when they pulled up to the property, they were surprised and horrified, just as Kirby's family would later be, to find out that nothing stood at that address any longer other than a mailbox. Apparently, in speaking with the neighbors later on, it was determined that the home had completely burned down on July 1st, 2023, all while the Spences were supposedly out of state for a family reunion. But you know what's really weird about this whole fire? Well, aside from everything, but allegedly, prior to the home burning down, Jeff had actually gone to his neighbors to let them know that his family was going to be going out of town for a while, and to inform them that the house had been having a lot of electrical issues lately. So, it might burn down to the ground while we're gone. Who's to say? I mean, obviously he didn't word it exactly like that, but in my opinion, it's pretty obvious the story that he was trying to weave together with that conversation. There's also rumors going around that Jeff Spence was actually seen on the property that morning just before it burned down, after he was supposedly already out of town. But I don't personally know if that's been confirmed or not, so I can't really speak to the validity of those rumblings. I believe it, but I'm not telling you to believe it. Okay? Anyway, it took Kirby's family weeks after all this went down to finally track down the baby and to confirm that she was okay. But until they were able to, can you imagine the absolute torment and anguish they were going through not being able to see her or to know that she was okay? First, they lost Kirby, and then his daughter was basically ripped away from them as well. Like, that had to be absolute torture. And actually, to the best of my knowledge, it was this that prompted them to take to social media and to start the Justice for Kirby Facebook page. The page was started in July of 2023, and it really just began as a way for Kirby's family to share his story and to try to gain publicity for his case. They very gradually shared what information they were comfortable with, and given the fact that the page has now amassed almost 20,000 followers, it's safe to say that they were successful in that mission. And honestly, I think it was advice and input from the public, coupled with just clarity gained from time and space away from the situation, that really solidified Kirby's family's suspicion that likely the Spences were responsible for Kirby's untimely death. I mean, surely they had that suspicion pretty early on when the Spences started acting like absolute fucking goons, but I guarantee public opinion on things and time to reflect and to dissect everything that had been done and said up to that point. It's like when they say you can't see the whole picture if you're too close to it, you know? But it's safe to say that by this point, they were all sure that Caitlyn and her parents were in fact to blame, as was the public that was invested in this case. Meanwhile, while all of this was going on, the Spences were busy purchasing homes in cash and seemingly planning to leave the country with Kirby's daughter. Yeah. What? So both of these pieces of information, I believe Gavin Fish, broke the news on. So again, I will make sure to have his coverage linked down below. But apparently, based on information supplied to Gavin, it appears as though sometime in 2023, Caitlyn had submitted for a passport for Kirby's daughter. And I don't know if you know this or not, but typically you wouldn't need a passport for a baby unless you're planning on taking said baby out of the country. Yikes. Thankfully, it never got to that point. Praise Jesus. But one thing the Spences were able to accomplish, Jeff Spence in particular, was the cash purchase of a $95,000 home in Oil City, Pennsylvania. Now, where do you think that Jeff, who, mind you, had claimed bankruptcy and lost property and 2 businesses just months prior to Kirby's death, managed to scrounge up almost $100,000 cash? Caitlyn's dad, Jeff's vehicle, was bursting at the seams with a shitload of Kirby's silver. And the reason that I think this, aside from the fact that we already know that he stole a bunch of Kirby's silver, is that historically, Jeff Spence is a man that is infamous for theft and for funding his own life off the backs of others. And this reputation dates all the way back to at least the 90s when Jeff Spence, complete with a wee little Caitlyn in tow, drugged and stole a very famous 68-point white-tailed buck named Goliath. Yes, it was late in the evening on October 19th, 1999, when Jeff crept onto the owner's property, shot Goliath with a tranquilizer dart, and loaded him into his pickup truck before driving off. And as soon as Goliath's actual owner, Rodney Miller, discovered that Goliath was missing, he immediately offered a $100,000 reward for the safe return of his prized deer. Yes, you heard that right, $100,000 for a deer. You see, because Goliath could be bred to produce offspring that also had these, magnificent racks.
That's what she said.
He and his sperm essentially were worth a shitload of money.
There's a sentence I never thought I'd say.
Now, thankfully, a group of deer farmers visiting Jeff Spence's property in July of 2003, they got a look at this absolutely massive buck that Jeff had, whom he supposedly named Hercules. And after a picture of this buck got back to Rodney Miller, he secured a court order to recover Goliath the very next day. And on the off chance that you're concerned by this, what if it was just another big-ass deer? They actually went on to DNA test the deer that was recovered, and when the results came in, they confirmed that Jeff's Hercules was actually Rodney's Goliath. Jeff went on to be charged and convicted of the theft, for which he faced up to 16 months in prison and $1.2 million that he would be ordered to pay in restitution. However, in the end, he was only sentenced to 90 days in county jail and 7 years of probation. Basically, all this to say that clearly Jeff Spence has no problem taking things from others that he wants or that he feels entitled to, no matter the potential consequences and no matter who it may hurt. But that begs the question, would he truly hurt his newborn granddaughter's father just to get his hands on some silver? Well, according to law enforcement, yep. After an extensive and grueling investigation by police and by the FBI, and after a torturous and emotionally exhausting 365 days, exactly 1 year to the day after Kirby was killed, so on November 30th, 2023, deputies from Smith County Sheriff's Office, along with U.S. Marshals, arrested Jeff and Karen Spence in the Sugar Grove area of Smith County, Virginia. Caitlyn Spence was also brought into custody by U.S. Marshals in Jefferson County, Pennsylvania, the same day. Now, unfortunately, an affidavit of probable cause at the time that I'm filming this has not been released to the public, so I can't go into specifics as to what exactly led to this arrest, as far as physical, circumstantial, or forensic evidence goes. But I think, based on the breakdown of the story that I've given thus far, we can all probably agree that, they've likely got the right people. Ugh, it is so disgusting to me that these people could rob this little girl of growing up with a father figure, sure, but of growing up with a father figure as incredible and amazing and inspirational as Kirby. And all for what? Some silver? All to end up in jail and to leave this little baby with neither parent. Get fucking wrecked. Ooh, these people. They are just the scum of the freaking earth, man. I will tell you what. Ooh, and you know what makes me physically ill is that Caitlyn is still listed in Kirby's obituary as one of those left to cherish his memories. Are you allowed to edit those in situations like this after the fact? Granted, I'm not saying that they should. They could very well be choosing to leave her in there for reasons I'm completely unaware of. Obviously, it's none of my business. I'm just saying that if I were ever in even a remotely similar situation, I know my petty ass would. At any rate, though, these mouth breathers are currently being held in separate facilities while they await their day in court. They were officially indicted for Kirby's murder back in April of this year. However, their trial dates have yet to be released. I do know, though, that given the fact that they're charged with capital murder, if they are found guilty, they're looking at a minimum of life in prison. And on the extreme end, they could even be facing the death penalty if found guilty. At this point, I don't think there has been any word as far as pleas go, and like I said, there's nothing out there right now in regards to a trial date, so I'll definitely keep you guys updated on that, but for now, that's pretty much where the case stands. And I hate to leave you on sort of a cliffhanger like that, but I think the important thing to acknowledge here is that these suspects are behind bars, and most importantly, Kirby's family is in the process of finally receiving the justice that they have so unwaveringly fought for over the last year and a half. As far as things stand with Kirby's daughter, I know that she's doing well. I don't have any specific information as far as what's going on with the custody situation with her right now, but I honestly don't really think that's anyone's business at this time. I think that all we need to know is that she is doing well. She is obviously away from the Spences, thank God, and Kirby's family has been able to maintain contact with her in the wake of the arrest of Caitlyn and her parents. So yeah, like I said, I will do my best to keep you guys updated as new information becomes available, but I would also urge you to head over to Facebook and follow the Justice for Kirby page that his family runs, because I guarantee you'll get faster updates there from them than you will from me. Not to mention that going into all the legal proceedings that are undoubtedly in their future, Kirby's family could likely use all of our support now more than ever. And with that, you guys, we are about wrapped for today. Rest in peace to poor Kirby. At just 36 years old, he was a self-made millionaire, a successful entrepreneur 3 times over, and most importantly, he was a dedicated and loving father, brother, son, nephew, uncle, and friend. He is so deeply missed by those who knew him and who loved him, and undoubtedly their worlds shine a little less bright now in his devastating absence. Kirby was such a sweet person and such a kind person. He was always willing to go out of his way to help someone in need, and always willing to lend a helping hand. He very clearly would have gone on to continue to do big things with his life, and it is so incredibly tragic that his children now have to grow up with just a memory of what an amazing person, an amazing influence their father was. Oh, and speaking of amazing, since Kirby's passing, his family has made a point not just to seek justice for his death, but also to ensure that he did not leave this earth in vain. One of the ways that they're doing that is through a scholarship program. The Kirby M. Carpenter Memorial Scholarship was presented to 5 separate graduating seniors in both the spring of 2023 as well as the spring of 2024. So 10 kids altogether. And that's just so far. Kirby's family is hopeful that through this scholarship, they will be able to keep Kirby's memory alive while also helping to provide support to teens in their community, hoping to further their education. And I don't know about you, but I am always so amazed when these families are able to take these horrific tragedies and somehow turn them into a way to help others. That takes an incredible level of strength to do that, and I just don't know that I would have that. So I will always be in awe of families like Kirby's who are able to come through these tragedies and to do these amazing and generous things in their loved one's honor. It truly is so admirable, so I just wanted to take a minute to spotlight that here before we wrap up for the day. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments down below. As always, I thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and to listen to this story. And of course, one final and special thank you goes to Jessica for requesting this one. If you have a case or a topic you'd like to see me cover, please fill out the case submission form that I have linked down in the description. And if by chance you're interested in anything about today's makeup, I will also make sure to have all of the information and the links for the products that I used today listed down there for you as well. If you haven't already and you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I put out new videos every 10 days. The date of my next video should be on the screen here for you now, but if you turn on your post notifications, you'll always be notified when I do post, and you'll always be sure to catch me back here in my next one. But until then, stay safe and have a good week. Bye! From the actual publication. Sure. Ooh. My back. Ooh, my front. Some money on me. He owned an... Come here. Come here.
Your breath smells like fish. Your breath stink. Yes, it does. Your breath stinks. Your breath stinks.
Can you sit your tippy-tappy little paws down, please? Did you just eat a dead fly? Oh, you're so gross. I feel like all that was shit, but it's gonna be fine, I'm sure. Take it easy. Oh my god, this hair, my nose, everything, my life. Oh my god.
Love you.
Love you too.